Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode of Real Life, Real Solutions with Coach Tami, where we provide solutions that are realistic, effective, attainable, and limitless. And listen, tonight I'm so excited about our guest, a very profound young woman who is doing some great work in the way of womanist ways. And I'll let her explain more of that in a moment. But a dear friend and colleague of mine, Reverend Dr. Tonya Bryan. Amen. I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome, Reverend Bryan. How are you today?
I am well, Coach Tami. Thank you for having me here. I'm excited about this conversation and looking forward to it.
Yes, so am I. So just tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am multi-layered. I am by day a science teacher for Patterson Arts and Science Charter School. I am the visionary and curator of Womanist Ways Incorporated. I am an adjunct professor at Pillar College in Newark, New Jersey. I am a former nonprofit executive, and I am an associate minister of the Community Baptist Church of Englewood, New Jersey, where I am the newly appointed women's ministry lead and excited about that work and what God is doing. I'm also the proud mother of one son, Minister Jeffrey Andrew Bryan. And that's
Awesome.
who I am.
Yeah, that's who you are. And let me tell you, and even just explaining, what she does and who she is, you guys have there's just so many awesome layers of wisdom and encouragement that is Minister Tonya Bryan. Um, so I want to get into our topic on today about reframing your narrative. So when you hear that phrase, what does that invoke to you? What does that say to you? What are your first thoughts of reframing your narrative?
My first thought when I hear reframing your narrative for me is that I am not binary, and I've never been binary. I have always been multifaceted. So no matter where I started in my career, it's never just been that one thing. And so when I'm looking at reframing your narrative, it's the ways in which you shift into different seasons in your life.
Okay, so explain that a little deeper for me when you say not binary to those who may not be familiar with that term. Um, and even with that, with the shifting,
Mhm.
how do you embrace understanding that you're not binary and being comfortable with that?
And so most times we feel that we have to be or do this or that, right? So we have options one and two, and that's it. Or not even options. We have plan A, plan B, right? Never do we even look or think about a plan C. It's A and B. And so for me, it's A through Z. And so
Hmm.
that's what I mean by not being binary. I'm not just, I don't just have plan A and plan B because I know that I can do all things, whatever my sets my mind to, right? Because God has given us so many gifts and talents. And God does not just call us to one work, I believe. I believe we shortchange ourselves when we limit ourselves to one thing. When God says, I've called you to teach, but your teaching is not limited to the church. Your teaching is not limited to Sunday school. Your teaching can be, for me, God, the first call that God gave me was the call to teach. And so my first assignment in teaching was Sunday school. And then I taught in Bible study. And I'm talking about the church context. I taught in Sunday school. I taught in Bible study. Now I'm teaching in the academy, which was my ultimate goal. I'm going to further my education to obtain that doctorate degree so that I can be more marketable for positions within the academy. But in terms of my secular employment, in various positions that I've held, I've always taught. I always came alive when it was time for me to do a workshop, no matter what that workshop was or that training. And so it's not, I'm not just limited to the church, right? So we don't just have to be binary. We just in the church and we serve the church and then we do whatever we do on our job, right? Because actually those worlds will ultimately, as they did for me, will ultimately collide.
They will ultimately collide. That's really good. So what will you say to someone, right? Because when we think about not being binary and we think about operating in different arenas or different levels, sometimes we'll hear this phrase of, oh, she's a jack of all trades, but a master of none, right? But learning to reframe your narrative, I think, comes with disseminating that thought. So, what would you
Mhm.
say in reference to, I think, disseminating some of the thoughts and beliefs that we were taught that kind of are hindering to us?
Yeah, it's about being comfortable and confident in who you are, right? Because when people say, when they make this statement, you're jack of all trades and master of none, we will never be masters of anything,
Hmm.
because we are ever learning, right? I have a master's of divinity, I have a master's in sacred theology, and I have not mastered either one of those things. Although I have the degree to say, okay, she is a master in this thing, right? We are never masters of anything. I believe, um, and my own philosophy is I'm a lifelong learner. I am every day, I desire to learn something new. Every day when I read the scripture, I'm asking God to show me something new, even in a familiar scripture, right? So we should not limit ourselves. And actually, that's just an insult to say, oh, that's kind of like a backhanded compliment when somebody says to you, you're a jack of all trades and a master of none. Hey, hey, hey. No, that's insulting, because you know what? God didn't just give me one gift. God gave me gifts. God gave me talents. God gives me creative ideas. God gives us witty inventions. And for us to me, that's kind of minimizing God's space in our lives. So I've not mastered anything, but I'm knowledgeable about, I have not mastered everything, but I am knowledgeable about a lot.
That's good. I haven't mastered everything, but I'm knowledgeable about a lot. Team, we need to make sure that we get that. We need to put that in a quote, and we will give you full, a full, we'll make sure that we acknowledge this was from Reverend Tonya Bryan, but that was a really good point. Um, so let me ask this: the knowledge that um you aren't binary, right? Was that something that you always walked in, or was there a particular experience that or a shift in your life that caused you to come to that realization?
As I've grown and evolved and looked back, because I'm very self-reflective, and so thinking about this conversation today and thinking about reframing my narrative, I started saying, you know what? You've never done one thing. Like in my life, I've never done one thing. I may have worked, gone to school, and always had a side, no, I'm gonna say, and I always had a side hustle, right? So even in my 20s, I was that lady coming into the beauty salon selling clothes. I was that girl at the park popping her trunk open, selling hair scrunchies and sunglasses, even though I had a full time job and I was in school. So
Okay.
I've never done one thing.
Okay.
So that's just being reflective on reframing that, those thoughts and those remembrance came back like, you know what, you've always been that chick.
Hmm.
You've
Okay.
never been singular.
on one track,
Never
on
been
one
on one track,
arena of
never even been on two tracks.
So it's all you always operated in that multifaceted space.
Always,
Good,
always. When I reflect, I've always operated in that space.
good. So I want to shift the conversation a little bit when we're talking about our narrative, because sometimes the narrative that is created by about us is not always done by us.
Mm.
Sometimes the narrative of who we are is voiced by other people. How would you speak to, or even just share, if you wouldn't mind, if there was a point where the narrative of who Tanya was if there was ever a point where your narrative was framed by somebody else or influenced by somebody else or impacted, and how you had, what work did you have to do to go through breaking out of that improper narrative.
Hmm. So I am, as you know, a former pastor's wife. So that was the biggest thing I ever had to break out of. Because even though coming into the marriage, I was already independent. I was already saved, sanctified, filled with the Holy Ghost. Told him I'm complete in Jesus. So you don't have to complete me in any way. Getting married, him becoming a pastor, um, serving the church, but not any way different than I had not been already because I was saved and sold out for the Lord. And so when we got divorced, then I no, so let me back up a little bit. So then it became first lady, right? So it's almost like your identity's been stripped. You're not even Tanya anymore. You just, first lady, Sister Bryan. And so after the divorce, seeing people who knew me in that space, they could not, I'm not saying they could not, they would have difficulty remembering and realizing that I'm an individual,
Mm.
right? Beyond that title, I'm Tanya. Beyond any title, I'm Tanya. So that was the biggest, and I hope I'm responding to the question.
Mhm.
The biggest transition where people know me in one space, and then even after that, people would see me at different conventions and workshops and things like that. And there's always somebody in the room that comes up and says, "Oh, you were married to so and so." Yeah, so that was like the conversation on the side, not that, oh, there's Tanya, but girl, she was married to so and so.
Mm.
So many years later, right? Our son is now 22. He is now remarried, additional children, right? And I'm still getting that. It's like, no, no, I'm not the wife. He has a wife. I'm not her though. So it's still, even up until last year, even up until last year. Oh,
Wow.
do you know she was married to, you know, so and so?
Wow. So, how would you, if you could encourage another woman or even some men that may be watching this show, right, that may have had some life experiences that wasn't uh, positive or didn't end in a positive way, and they have to now learn how to rise above that negative connotation of who
Mm,
people think they are or expect them to be because of a title. What
mm.
would you say to them to encourage them about? Because I'm pretty sure that that had to be a struggle to live through and rise above. So, what would you say to an individual experiencing that?
And so let me also add this caveat. I was called to ministry before I married a pastor. I put my call on hold to support that ministry,
Mm,
right? And my ex-husband. And so there for me there was a trepidation even entering into ministry because it's like, oh, you wanted to be the pastor,
mm,
right? So that's another layer to that foolishness. But now I'm just like, whatever. God had called me a long time ago. I don't have to explain that to anybody. So what I would say to somebody who has been in that space, not necessarily, married to a pastor or whatever, is, you know what? Be you. Be you. Be confident. Do not, and this sounds like a cliche, but I'm going to explain it. Don't let anybody dull your shine. Because what happens when you dummy down yourself for somebody else, they don't even, and then not that I didn't dummy down myself in my relationship, but I did dummy down myself in church.
Mm.
Being a full executive director, powerful, calling the shots day by day, coming to church shrinking so that you don't intimidate people. I would say to you, my brother and my sister, be who you are authentically. People will always put you in some kind of box. And that box is the box that they designed for you. That's not the box that God designed for you. So you do the work, right? You do the work to get free, to liberate yourself, and allow God to show you who you are. Because there was a point in my life where I learned, God showed me myself. And I said, God, I thank you for showing me myself because I like who I'm becoming. So don't see yourself as others see you. See yourself as God sees you, right? But you have to do the work and you have to be reflective. All that noise from the other side is going to come, but it's just a distraction, right? It's just a distraction. Stay prayerful, right? Stay prayerful because that's the only thing that's going to keep you from some of those clanging cymbals, right? Is prayer and the word of God. So those that would be what I would say to someone. Just be authentically who you are, and that will shine through. And then eventually, people will see who you are for real, or they won't. But you know what? That's not your concern. Your concern is to walk in the fullness and the authenticity of who you are and who God has called you to be as a person outside of ministry, who God has called Tonya to be, not Minister Tonya or, future Dr. Tonya. No, who God has called Tonya to be.
That is real. That was really good. Thank you so much for sharing. And you said something, and I'm gonna come back with a question after this commercial break based off of something that you just said, but that was really good. And I hope you guys are taking notes at home because this is really good information for us to be able to really begin. If you haven't begun the work, and we'll talk about that in a minute, of reframing the narrative of your life, that was a really good foundation for us. So we're going to take a quick commercial break, and after we'll come back with Reverend Tonya as we continue talking about reframing your narrative. Stay put, and if you don't have a pen and a paper yet, this is your opportunity. Right quick, you got about a minute and 10 seconds to go run, get something so you can jot down some of these notes, because I know that Reverend Tonya has so much more to share. So stay right with us, and we'll be right back. back, everyone, and thank you for staying tuned with us here at Real Life, Real Solutions. And tonight, again, we have our guest, Reverend Tonya Bryan, as we continue this discussion on reframing your narrative. Reverend Tonya, right before we cut to commercial break, you were talking and really diving in about learning who you are or who God says you are without the title, right? Um, and I want to talk about that a little further because a lot of times, and I know in that moment you were talking in the church context, right? You were referring to in the church context of the title of who you were, just as Tonya, not as first lady, not as minister. But I think often in life,
Mm.
especially for women, we get lost in the titles of wife, of mom, of employee, of employer, and all of these different things. Talk to us just in a more natural aspect of,
Mm.
because so I'll just use myself, right? Being a young mom, I became a mom at a young age, and that was my narrative for almost the majority of my life. I'm
Mhm.
mommy,
Right.
um, and breaking out of that, there's oftentimes a lot of guilt with
Mm.
breaking out of titles other people put on us or our self-imposed or just societal. Speak to us on
Mm.
how, I guess I want to say, how we marry our titles without being consumed by them. Like how do
Mm.
you reframe your narrative in the totality of who you are? Um, yeah, that's the question. If that makes sense, that's the question.
So my greatest title is mom. Like that's my greatest title is mom. When my son was growing up and he was school age, I'm Jeffrey's mom. I'm not Miss Bryan. I'm Jeffrey's mom. Um, so I'm Jeffrey's mom, and I'm working as a policy advisor in the book administration, doing all those great things. Then I was executive director for two different organizations, and people could not see me as mom. They all they saw was a suit and pearls. Um, and in reframing the narrative, it was interesting. I had this conversation recently with somebody else that my colleagues and my staff could not imagine me when I would share with them, oh no, my son had a wrestling match and I'm on the floor with my iPad taping his match. And they were like, you? I'd love to see that, right? Even leaving the nonprofit sector, when people would say, like, why would you leave? You're at the pinnacle, you're the executive director. But mom was more important to me, being
Mm,
my son's mom and not missing his life, because I was always present. And so for me to be who I not who I well, part of who I am, right? The biggest part, the most important part to me, being who I am is Jeffrey's mom. And so even leaving that, people couldn't believe like I just walked away. But my context is faith, so I'm gonna keep going back there. But the Lord told me to leave. The Lord told me what to do, and the Lord provided. Um, and so had I not done that, I would have missed the most important part, one of the most important parts of my son's life. And so for me, it was more important that I be okay with taking off that title of executive director, right? In essence, it's kind of like I did that. I did that twice, right? And it was good, but I was burnt out. And so
mm,
sometimes you need to know when to transform, when to reframe that narrative. Right now, it's time for me to shift. I need to shift into my mom gear because I'm responsible for a person's life. I'm responsible for, and you know what? We have to work, right? Everybody is not going to have that opportunity because you have to work, because you have to provide for your family. I was providing for my mother and my son. right? Neither of them wanted, materialistically, they didn't want for anything, but what was missing was me and my presence,
Mm-hmm.
which is our love language. Our love language is being present, is paying attention, right? Even growing up, my son, when we went out, would go out to eat, he would say, okay, we can't use our phones. Even now, if he and I go out to eat, nope, we can't, we have to put these phones to the side because this is our time. So time is that love language. And so in reframing that narrative from, being that policy advisor, being that executive director, but it's being mom. And thankfully, every position that I had, I was able to bring my son to work at some point or another, which was also a blessing. But I also thank God for my mom, because my mom was the one who was caring for my son when I had to work all those long and late hours. And so, even career wise, you're not married to that title,
Mm-hmm.
right? What you're really married to is the work. And it's the passion that I happen to be in the nonprofit sector. I love helping people. I just love people in general. And so the work that I did was helping the disenfranchised. So there are ways that I'm still involved in that work. And even with Womanist Ways, as it begins to grow and evolve, we're going to be doing some of that work as well. And so I hope I answered the question. Did I answer the question?
You did, but you said something. So again, I have a follow up question. um, how would you encourage someone that is struggling with
Mm,
making those shifts, but trying not to feel like they're diminishing who they are?
mm,
'Cause sometimes in life we will take on, not take on, but like when you become a mother, right, and you make that decision of, maybe I'm going to step back in the corporate world or even in ministry to be more, like you said, to be more present with my child. Sometimes with that comes the feeling of, but I don't want to lose me, I don't want to be
mm,
diminished or seen in a diminished capacity because I've made a choice in this season, for the betterment of my family. But it does come sometimes with those thoughts. So what
mhm.
would you say to someone, male or female, because now, in the times that we're living in, mothers and fathers are making more of a conscious choice to be present with family, but it does come with some emotions and thoughts. So what would you say to someone struggling with that?
That one, it is normal, that feeling of guilt, not being as present in your child's life as you would desire to be. That's normal. I think and not only parents of humans, but also pet parents,
Hmm.
right? They have that guilt, because my older sister is a pet parent. And in our conversations, she was having guilt about leaving her pet at home after working from home since the pandemic, right? And so there's always a level of guilt. So sit in that space and know that it's a normal feeling to feel that, but also understand that everybody doesn't have that flexibility, to just to leave a job or the skill set. So when I left nonprofit, I didn't just like leave and sit on the couch. Um, I also have an LLC, which that's a whole other story. But I also have an LLC, and I served as a consultant, and so I did consultant work, and I still do consultant work. And so you you have to prioritize your time at work, right? So if your hours are 9 to 5, leave at 5 o'clock so that you can spend time with your family. As a nonprofit executive, my hours weren't 9 until 5. Um, I worked 9 to 5. Well, I was there when my staff was gone. It was nothing for me to leave work at 7 or 8 o'clock, right? And then take work home. And so then when is the time spent with your family, right? Because that's just not healthy. So you have to manage your own time. If it's 9 to 5, then you leave at 5 o'clock. And then when you get home, don't start to pad it with so many other things.
Yeah.
Spend time with your child. When your child is off from school, try to manage your days off, right? Your sick time, your personal time, your vacation time. Manage those days with your child's schedule. And then when you guys are both off, do something with your child. Don't say, oh, well, now that this is the day I'm going to go to lunch with my girlfriends and I'm going to do, all of these things. Spend quality time with your child. Um, Talk to them and have transparent conversations, because let me tell you something, these kids growing up now, and even my son is 22, if you don't talk to these kids and you tell them the right thing, they're going to learn the wrong thing. So they have TikTok,
So
what's a
much.
TikTok, Snapchat, because they said Facebook is for old people. Instagram, so many of these social media platforms that have all kind of foolishness. Our children are learning from there. You don't want your child to learn from there. You want your child to learn from you. Have those difficult, especially if you have a teenager, have those hard conversations that your parents never had with you, right? Have those hard conversations.
Yeah. That
So
is.
that's what I would tell someone.
Yeah, that is really imperative to have those hard conversations. And so you've given us a lot of great nuggets, a lot of great information about, reframing your narrative and things we can do with child age or middle aged, for lack of a better term right now, children. But what would you say about reframing your narrative as that role, as a parent change? Because as parents, it never stops, but it does change as they get older, right? Because we're no longer, um what was the I forgot what I was where I was going with the phrase that I was getting ready to
Mhm.
use, but we're not nurturing them as much, as they get older.
Right.
Um, they get older, they move out, or they're in school, and so
Mhm.
they don't glean from us as much as they did when they
Right.
were younger. So our role kind of changes.
Mhm.
And again, some of us, I'll speak for myself, being that for so long, I'm mommy, 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 and now it's like, oh, I have to figure out Tamara now because they're grown.
Mhm.
Like my children have children, like,
Mhm.
and so their priorities are other places. So the priority of my life is no longer raising the children, and
Mhm.
so now, and we talked about this earlier. I'm learning to reframe my narrative of, hmm, who are you?
Mhm.
Because for me, it was dropping to be mommy. And now, and so many of us deal with that. Okay, I'm not in that role to that capacity. So what would you say to somebody that's
Hmm.
relearning who the heck they are and what they like to do, and what their purpose actually is?
That's such an interesting question. The parenting piece, my prayer has been since my son was like elementary school, that I would be the parent he needs me to be in whatever season of his life that he is in. Because the same little boy doesn't need to be parented as this 22-year-old. So I have to be a little more hands off now, and be somebody else in this season of his life. Um, in terms of, I'm losing my thought. Okay. In terms of reframing your narrative and learning who you are, I remember my pastor asked us, what did you learn about yourself during the pandemic? Well, for me, D Nice was on Instagram. He was going live. He plays all the music that I love, all the music that I love. And you know what I relearned about myself? That I enjoy dancing, right? And so I put D Nice on and I'm like, I get it, right? And I'd be dancing. And so it's those little moments and then you go, hey, I forgot how much I like to dance. Or, oh wow, I forgot about this song. And then when Swiss Beats and Timbaland had verses, and they would have these different artists come on, and some of those songs you would have a flashback and you would remember when, right? All of that is learning yourself, and all of that helps you reframe your narrative, right? Oh, I forgot how much I enjoyed this. Oh, I forgot how much I like this. Why? Because life happened, other responsibilities took over, but look at the small things that you used to enjoy,
Mm-hmm.
right? The different, think about the music that you used to enjoy, right? So it's just the small things, right? Not always these huge, life changing, transformational things, right?
Yeah.
Oh, now, and for me also, in losing my mom, because I was a caregiver to her. And in October of 20, well, October of 2020, my mom transitioned to be with the Lord. But when she got sick in June, I saw the end, but didn't want to accept it. So now, living without her and not having to care for her, I had to reframe my narrative.
Mm-hmm.
I had to go back and say, okay, who is Tonya that she goes out now and doesn't have to worry about anybody at home? That was new for me because I went from caring for my son to caring for my mom. So now, today, I'm reframing my narrative. There were even things that I started thinking about doctoral programs and having those conversations with my mom. And when she got sick, and then even after she passed, I put it down. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. Was I doing that for me, or was I doing that for her to make her proud? Right. But then after the time has lapsed, it's like, no, that's that's for you. That's for you. Reframing your narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so now, going back, looking at those schools that were on my radar and beginning to prepare applications for doctoral programs, right? That's reframing my narrative. But reframing my narrative as I serve my church, as I serve my community, as I serve, at school, as I continue to parent this, 22-year-old, preacher, I'm reframing, right? And I'm not just reframing two areas of my life. I'm reframing a lot of different areas of my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, not to mention that I have written a book, right? In the midst of all, of leaving, nonprofit, reframing, right? Because in that book, it's more practical. There are more practical tools in that book because for me, in teaching, it's about transforming one's mind, right? Because I believe that even in life, we have the mechanics to do what it is we do, right? We know how to we know how to move, right? We know how to shift, we know how to navigate. But what makes people successful and how they shift and move and navigate is their thinking. Because if you don't know how to think and process this without moving right before you make the move, then that reframing of the narrative can't happen because you're stuck, because you don't even know how to think about it.
Yeah. Wow, that was really, really good. And I feel like right here, because you talked about the mechanics of it, and I feel right here would be a good point for us to allow you to give us some of what the mechanics look like. Because I know you have a plethora, and you've already been fleshing out in the conversation. But we're gonna take a quick commercial break, and after the break, I'm going to give the floor to Reverend Tonya because I know there is more that God has put on her heart about us reframing our narrative, some tools, some tips, some mechanics, as she said, on what that looks like. So we're going to take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, Reverend Tonya is going to come and She's going to give us those tools, tips again, and the mechanics on how we can actively, authentically, and boldly, right, operate in the manner of reframing our narrative. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back. All right, guys, welcome back from commercial break. Listen, this has been such an empowering and informative session with Reverend Tonya Bryan as we have been discussing reframing your narrative. She has given so much wisdom. So listen, if you missed any portion or you didn't get a chance to take some good notes, I encourage you to, when the show is over, to go back and catch the replay and get all of these wisdom jewels that she has given us on today. But right now, I want to give Reverend Tonya the floor so she can give us some more encouragement, some more tips, tools, mechanics on how we can reframe the narrative of our lives. So, Reverend Tonya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Coach Tami. And so, what I would like to leave with you all today in reframing your narrative is one, be who you are, right? Be your authentic self. That's one of the most difficult things that I find that people are they have to navigate, especially in the world of social media. Understand that all social media does is put out all of the good things, all of the flowery things. Very seldom do we see on social media someone truly being transparent. It happens, but it is rare. Do not use social media as a measuring stick as to whether or not you are successful. You determine what success looks like, because what success looks like for you may not look like for anyone else. I encourage you, whatever your faith context is, you need to pray or you need to meditate, because it's important for us to be self-reflective. If you're not one to journal, right? What you can do, get a notebook and just write things down. If you don't want to call it journaling, all journaling is writing things down, right? So I encourage you to write things out, because what happens, we need to release some of these things that are in us, and then we can circle back to read them later when we have transitioned into that next place of liberation and freedom for ourselves. So I encourage you to write things down. If you have an angst with someone, right? If you have beef with somebody and you say, you know what, you've been holding that thing in, write them a letter and then burn it. If not, just put it in the garbage. Why? Because you have to release that toxicity from your mind, from your heart, from your spirit, right? I encourage you to do those things. I also encourage, and all of these things is all about being self-reflective. Because if we're not self-reflective, we cannot even transition. And what's coming to my mind right now is a bicycle. When we ride a bike, when we're younger, depending on your age, I don't know if you are Gen Z, baby boomer, or millennial. We had, the 10-speed bikes with the gears. Now, if you're just riding down the street, you're on one gear. If you begin to incline, you're going to shift those gears. And that's what reframing your narrative is. Reframing your narrative is shifting that gear. It's like, you know what? I'm not her right now. I'm somebody else. Not that I'm somebody else. You're still the same person, but the parts of your life are transitioning. You are not the same person that you were 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 15, or even 20 years. I hope not 20 years ago, right? We need to learn to grow and transition and embrace us, right? Embrace your full, authentic selves. And don't be afraid to sit with yourself, right? Take yourself out to dinner. That's part of who you learn. That's part of how you learn who you are, is spending time alone with yourself. So I encourage you to do that as well, because sometimes we don't want to go in the restaurant and sit and eat by ourselves, because if somebody comes in that we know, oh my God, I'm by myself. Like, being alone is not a bad thing. I love to shop alone. I love to eat alone. I love to walk alone. Why? Because I can just hear, for me, my faith context, I could just hear God as I'm walking, right? I can just hear nothing. I can enjoy the elements. I can enjoy hearing the sounds of the leaves flapping on the tree. I can fully embrace the breeze on my face. All of these things help you to become who you are, so that you can begin to reframe the narrative. And you know what? I'm not going to say come outside of the box. I'm going to say tear that box up, because you are more than a box. Your life is more than a to do list to be checked off. Your life is ever evolving. You are always, and I shared during the show how my life has always transitioned, how I've never just been a one note person. I've always been multifaceted. And now I'm in the place in life that I enjoy the multiplicity of who I am. And I embrace all of her. I embrace all of her fully, with all of her flaws, all of her imperfections. I'm her, and I embrace her. I want you to embrace him, and I want you to embrace her. Whoever you used to be, people will remind you of who you used to be. But guess what? That's not who you are and who you're evolving into. You're always going to have people to remind you of who you were. It's okay. But you have to reframe your narrative for yourself, not so that others can see how you've grown, not so others can see how you've matured, but you have to do the work for yourself. Go to the dollar store, Dollar Tree, get you a notebook, get you a pen, and just begin to write. Don't think about what you're writing. Just put that pen to the pad and just start writing. And I challenge you to do that for 7 days, then go back and read it. And I promise you, from day 1 to day 7, you will see your thinking will have transformed. It doesn't take 30 days, it doesn't take 40 days. It could take you 7 days to begin to transform your life, transition your position in life, so that you can then begin to reframe the narrative of your life. Part of the work of Womanist Ways that we do is focusing on women who are baby boomers and Gen Z, who are transforming the narrative of their life. They're beginning again. They're doing some of these, they're entering to some of these spaces that me and Coach Tami talked about, right? They're empty nesters. And they're saying, okay, now I don't have children to raise. What am I doing? Who am I? What do I enjoy doing? I forgot about what all those things that I enjoy doing, besides cooking and cleaning and doing laundry and having my not having my own schedule, but having the schedule for children. I'm divorced now. I'm no longer his wife. I'm no longer her husband. Who am I? What are some of the things that I enjoyed? Who are my friends outside of this relationship? Right? Even outside of some friendships. Who am I? And once you learn that, you can then begin to reframe your narrative. And so those are the tools and the tips that I leave with you. And I hope that there was something that was said today that encourages you, so that you can then begin to transition to reframe your narrative and be the best you that you can be, and understand that the only person that you are in competition with is yourself.
Wow. That was so very good. Thank you, Reverend Tanya, for just the time that you've taken, the knowledge that you have given, the encouragement that you have given unto us. It was truly, truly a blessed time on tonight. I hope you all received. No, I won't say I hope. I know you all have received. some again some jewels for your life. You may be currently in the space of reframing who you are, reframing the narrative of your life. Maybe this shift, is upcoming for you. I just pray that you take these tools and these jewels and you use them as you comfortably and authentically and without apology become who God has created you to be. So again, thank you, Reverend Dr. Tonya, for being here with us on tonight and for sharing so much knowledge with us. Just really briefly before we leave on tonight, can you tell us tell the audience how they can follow you or how they can connect with you?
You can follow me on social media at Womanist Ways. It is a Facebook page. We're on Facebook. We are on Instagram. If you would like to contact me, you can contact me through the email womanistways, all one word, at gmail.com. Again, Womanist Ways on both Facebook and Instagram, and Womanist Ways at gmail.com. Womanist Ways, all one word. And Coach Tami, I want to thank you for this opportunity to share with your audience. This has been good for me as well. So I thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And I look forward to having you on some future shows because, like I told you guys at the top of the show, she is just a wealth of knowledge in so many different ways and arenas. And we're going to have Reverend Tonya come back and share with us on some different topics. But I know, and I'm glad that you were blessed on tonight. I'm going to speak that we were blessed. We were all blessed on this conversation tonight on reframing your narrative. And again, just thank you for joining us. And we'll see you on the next episode of Real Life, Real Solutions with Coach Tami, where we provide solutions that are realistic, effective, attainable, and limitless. Oh, one more thing. If you haven't shared, please share this channel with others so that they can be blessed by these interviews as well. And that's all we have for tonight. Everyone have a great night. We'll see you next